Hey, good afternoon, world. It is Monday, June 6th, 2022, which is a Monday, and it looks like it's 11:04 a.m. my time. And what's the latest? Well, God, there's a lot rocking and rolling out there, and the more things change, the more things they stay the same. On Thursday of last week, CEO of Chase Bank and five-time recidivist who runs the largest literal criminal organization in the world, and that's not hyperbole, CEO Jamie Dimon revealed that, through a secret recording to his shareholders, that we're about to experience a hurricane. Now, whether that's a category 5 or something less, he wasn't certain of, but what he was inferring was the policy of the Federal Reserve is going to make the difference. Now, on top of that, I think it was Monday today that Elon Musk, declared pretty much parallel sentiments. And, the difference between somebody like me and Jamie Dimon and Elon Musk making these sorts of pronouncements are the fact that they're in charge of billions of dollars. I'm not quite that guy, but unfortunately, I have the $29 trillion truth. So in a nutshell, you can't look at the 2008 great financial crisis as a standalone event, as something that was historical, where all of the answers were solved, and so therefore it's a piece of history that we can look back on, and everybody knows what happens. That's absolute fucking bullshit. Nobody knows what happens, especially these morons that are in independent media, and a lot of them are actually really smart. And I only say morons in context that it's really hard to get their attention because they're too busy living in their own private Idaho. And I have contact and direct access to some of the biggest names there are, as well as some of the biggest names there are in the business, of which some of them interact with me pretty much frequently, and they know that what I'm saying is real. But a lot of the times there's radio silence, and there's a lot of radio silence because of political ramifications or connections, or quite frankly, the business model fuels a lot of those at the apex of this. That doesn't mean they're in on it. That means that they just actually depend on it. So for example, if I'm like an A-list Hollywood movie star and I get big blockbuster budget movies and, things that could go global, that all takes finance. Nobody's like stroking a check out of their own bank account that's basically shelling out, $300 million for a film so that it could potentially make billions of dollars around the globe. No, those are giant banks or investment banks or investors or hedge funds or private equity or any number of different sorts of category where this money comes from to be able to fuel that stuff. And in that particular, instance, it's pretty brilliant, all things considered, how that system works, and then ultimately, spits out a product that might make billions of dollars in revenue. Okay, now that's high stakes stuff, right? And, I'll say this as an aside, as a filmmaker, post-COVID and really everything that's happened in this crazy world over the last several years, and really even before that because of just the growth of social media, is that, the movie theater was once a refuge. It's kind of like a congregation. There was more than, just one type of movie that used to play in movie theaters around this country. And that's what inspired me to want to become a filmmaker, quite frankly. And those, those auditoriums, they became a congregation for the audience where you could pull together people in society to watch, a product that reveals something where there's a market for it, and it actually generates introspection or discussion and the types of things that a thriving democracy actually counts on to function. That I find myself fortunate to have grown up in an era where all of that was possible. But, now we have social media that's overwhelming. Everybody lives in their own sort of space. They can watch one thing from one moment to the next and then just get completely overwhelmed and distracted. And then, of course, go to work and they have to work full time. So therefore, they're just not seeing this stuff, right? And, an example of this over the weekend, I happened to catch this really, really attractive female anchor broadcaster literally just reiterating talking points of the Federal Reserve. And she said with glee, she's like, oh yeah, and it looks like we're going to have massive job layoffs, and that's good because that's what the Fed wants. Most of you are in that category and you don't see it coming. The hurricane, or it's bad news from Elon Musk and Jamie Dimon, or the woman who was a this beautiful news anchor woman who's just reading the teleprompter and repeating what Fed talking points are of some junior producer who has no idea how the system works, are basically reiterating bullshit. And where you are and what kind of information you're receiving is really all about, how you can frame this stuff. But what I'm telling you is the way the system works. The 2008 Great Financial Crisis is an ancient history. It's not something that we figured out and everybody knows. It's what our system is and what it's become. And the Con at www.thecon.tv is the only project that makes it all clear. And we were absolutely canceled. And if you're all clear on how the system works, then you can't be played. You can't basically be scratching your head when shit hits the fan and go, oh, I didn't see it coming. Or you can't sit in front of, pick your favorite politician who's been around for decades, who's like geriatric and right on the cusp of, leaving this earth because they've been there for far too long and they've never made any changes. And it's the system that's been going back literally decades in terms of the global financialization through neoliberalism and how this whole thing works, which is a lot of leverage for the big guys. But it all basically fuels this financialization that I can continue to rain upon you is nothing but a gigantic fiction. If you stimulate trillions of dollars into the economy of the bad actors that have pulled the wool over everybody's eyes, buried tens of millions of people, took over the courts to illegally foreclose on millions of people and destroy millions of pensioners, and they don't get any sort of accountability, any jail time, any clawback on the money they made during this thing, and instead you give them trillions of dollars, what do you think is going to happen? Now, how big this calamity might get, I'm not sure. Is it the end-all be-all? Are we right back in the mix of 1929? Look, cycles happen all the time. And a lot of what took place to create the 2008 Great Financial Crisis and stuff that's never ended is the same type of stuff that happened in the Great Depression. But at the Great Depression, we ended up having in the United States, which was the only country that did this, we actually let the law prevail and we fixed the problems, okay? But in the rest of the world, it descended into madness of fascism under, Hitler, and of course, communism under Stalin, and both of them were murderous thugs that murdered millions upon millions of people. How many of you out there realize that the amount of deaths that took place in World War II were somewhere along the lines of 50 to 70 million people? If you can compare that, I think statistic-wise, I think it was nearly 2 billion people on the earth at that time. I think the equivalency of that would be somewhere to be 300 to 600 million people dead today. Is that what we have to go through before you to finally go, oh, Jesus, this guy Patrick knows what he's talking about? Look, what we have to do is we have to shift the system. We have to penetrate the noise. We have to overcome the walls of madness and corruption and deception. And we've got to use the truth as our weapon to blow this thing to kingdom come. What I mean by that is we need to wrest control of the power. I got to use a cultural reference again because it's a lot of what I've been talking about for a long time in the fictional depictions with these great television series that have been happening for some time, right? And the most recent one I'll add to the list is The Lincoln Lawyer on Netflix, which is fabulous, which basically gets to the same thing that I've been talking about for a long time. Not financial corruption, but just judicial corruption. And I've been saying to a lot of people online, quite frankly, on Twitter, I've gotten involved with all sorts of people that are they think I'm being radio silent to their understanding of certain types of corruption in the courts. I'm not minimizing that, but I'm focusing on the big picture, which is the financial corruption that has basically taken over the world. And if you want to understand further the details of what's going on in the purpose, I guess, as it were, of Vladimir Putin and Russia and Ukraine, it's pretty simple at this stage of the game. It's about oil and gas and resources and pipelines and access to ports and all of those things that basically fuel the Russian economy, which is dependent upon fossil fuel. I think they're the second largest producer of fossil fuel in the world, only next to Saudi Arabia, and they would be more if they had all of their territory from the Soviet Union intact. And how does that fit into global markets? Well, you got to understand that the United States, like I've also told you since 2001, revealed that the dollar is basically, predicated on oil. Oil is the gold standard. That's all it's been for the last 4 or 5 decades. Saudi is the swing producer. And why am I going in this direction? Because we're seeing this sort of, these headwinds of these huge, colossal global scenarios that could create that Category 5 hurricane that Jamie Dimon's talking about. And is that going to hurt Jamie Dimon or Elon Musk? No, it's just their employees that are going to get screwed, and the economy is going to get screwed. They already cashed out. They've got billions. They'll pick up all this stuff on the cheap, and then they'll do it again. And what I'm trying to get in front of you and through your head and to share like crazy is I was canceled. I've got access to the biggest names in the business. I was literally canceled. Imagine if you were, and I'd highly encourage a lot of people to check out the latest Oliver Stone depiction of the new evidence that's come out on the JFK assassination. It's very, very compelling. I haven't gotten through the whole thing, but my God, it's terrifying, quite frankly. But I have evidence going into what we called oh gosh, I've got to think of all of these different acronyms of what took place after the great financial crisis, starting with the Lovell hearings and then going into the, Jesus, it's eluding me at the moment. Look, long and the short of it is a lot of the times the government puts investigations together like they did after 9/11 to try to get to the bottom of what took place, and then nothing gets fucking figured out. I mean, the Bush and Cheney administration basically suborned all of the information that has come out since that basically makes it known that Cheney and Bush knew that the terrorists were in the United States. And they suborned our investigations, or I should say our intelligence agencies. And then following the great financial crisis, we had a huge investigation into what caused the 2008 great financial crisis. It was bipartisan, and they came up with a lot of the stuff that I introduced in the con. But unfortunately, they only spent $11 million on that for something that ended up costing the world, hundreds of trillions of dollars. And again, they didn't get to the bottom of it. I picked up the pieces and I brought this to the scope of the American people. And what I'm telling you is that nothing has changed since 2008. It's the same game. What you need to understand is quantitative easing purchased toxic assets that made the American people foam on the runway for the financial system. And they've never relented in that. Everything that happened in 2019, it's the same story that led to this massive growth in real estate, but it was flooded with the market because liquidity was flooded into the system, and it goes into what constitutes the con. And then it blew up in all of the other consumption sorts of debt that's out there. And now Americans, and I'm sure you're one of them, if you're listening to me and if you're listening intently, I bet you a vast majority of you are in debt up to your eyeballs. What happens if you lose your job? What happens if you lose your 2 jobs? That could be coming. That appears to be why the Fed is going to end quantitative easing, which is what has triggered Jamie Dimon to talk about this hurricane, and same with Elon Musk. And then ultimately, that's all he's concerned about, quantitative easing and quantitative tightening. That's where they sell this shit. That's where the market has been. And that's what the United States government put through all the world. And the central banks were in on it. And apparently around the world, the central banks are no longer buying this stuff and they're selling it. And, these headwinds plus inflation equals they're going to increase interest rates, which is going to create mass employment, which is going to trigger a collapse. How big it is anybody's guess. But if the debt numbers, which appear to be far in excess of what we saw in 2008, which is unbelievable, if all of that's true, then hold on to your frickin' hats, people, because it's going to get ugly. And I'm trying to make you aware of this to get you into the streets, into the theaters, to watch the con, to help us to create a populist wave to push back and just hold the criminals that are in control accountable and purge them from our system. This is history. This is the way it's always done. The only difference from what I am suggesting to you and what usually plays out in history is that we still have a small sliver of time to be able to put the right people in position with the right critical mass, loaded with the facts, to basically purge the corruption from our system. You throw them in jail, you take their money back, you send them off into the sunset, and they never get to come back again. I mean, those are kind of the rules when you violate, the law based on, the way it's written. I mean, it's not rocket science, but if you don't relinquish their grip on power, you're forced to basically be destroyed over and over and over again, which leads to the kind of stuff that happened in World War II. And by the way, the stuff that happened in World War II, really wasn't any different than happened throughout history. The difference was the scale. We just get better at technology and more and brutal ways to kill people. And, Jesus Christ, we could probably dissipate half the global, population in a nanosecond if this stuff spins out of control. And maybe that's the plan. Obviously, I don't have access to that information. I'm just telling you what I know. Why would we let these guys basically destroy us? Why? Because you don't want to understand the world you live in? Stop that. I need to get to 1 in 10 of you that are patriots, that are people that are wise, that are people that care about character, integrity, and justice for all, and we got to fight for it. It's up to us. If we don't do it, nobody else will. Onwards and upwards.